an ultimate global podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.
So good afternoon to one and all to this exciting episode of Ultimate Global Podcast, where we are joined with Professor Bradley Hastings. He's a researcher at UNSW Sydney, and he's here to talk about this topic, which I'm sure he would have guided to a lot of teams, student teams and other kind of teams in the university. And we are going to talk about the benefits of team-based working here. We know how important it is for the organizations to have productive teams so that they can achieve great results. And Professor Bradley actually teaches that to the students at the university level on the basis of his own experiences. So welcome to today's podcast episode, Professor.
Thank you, sir. It's a delight to be here. Thank you.
So to begin with, how would you define a team-based working model as compared to when there are not when a company is not having so many productive teams? How important that you rate that in an organization achieving its goals?
Well, teamwork is absolutely fundamental to an organization achieving its goals, and the simple reason for that is that life has just got a lot more complex. If you go back 100 years, a bit over 100 years. I mean, Henry Ford, invented the production line for the Model T Ford, and that car had, I think, about 900 parts, and it was kind of conceivable back then that one person could kind of wrap their head around all the production processes that were required to put that car together. I mean, it's sort of like a equivalent to a hobbyist today, building a little kit model or something like that. But today, that's not the case. A modern car has 10,000 parts, sometimes even more than that. And with that quantity of things to think about, it's just inconceivable that one single person can wrap their head around everything that's going on. And so we need teams. We need to have a team of people, someone who's responsible for the engine, someone who's responsible for the paintwork, someone who's responsible for the interior. And those people, take charge of the particular elements of an automobile, sticking with the analogy, and they work with each other so that it comes together. And this theme of increased complexity is common throughout the world. Everything is becoming more complex, and it's going to get more complex, which means that how we work in teams and how we help teams become effective is just a crucial skill for humanity going forwards.
Yep. Yeah, I think these are good points. But what do you think are some of the key components that really makes a good team? Some of the people can say that you should have good communication skills so that you don't have any misunderstandings or communication gaps while you are talking to each other. People can also say that you should have a team which is giving regular feedback to each other. Importance of feedback to each other really builds the confidence of the team members and also raises their performance level at every step. What are some of the components that you generally train to your students at UNSW? I've been your student, by the way, in that subject.
Yes, I remember. Look, I think it's just important to frame, what we're looking for in a team. And you hit on two really important things, communication and also feedback. They're absolutely essential. But, every team kind of wants them. But in doing so, you can't sort of... you can't just say to a team, I want you to be good communicators and I want you to give good feedback, because people sometimes don't like, being told what to do. But another aspect is that there are some ingredients which create those environments. There are some ingredients that create environments where people communicate honestly and where, effective communication is given. And I think, in setting up effective teams, I would probably highlight three of those ingredients. So that the first one is diversity. Absolutely crucial. If you pick a team of your friends that are like-minded, come from the same backgrounds, think about the same thing, go to the same football games on the weekend, and put them in a team, you're likely to get the same way of thinking about a problem Whereas if you put people from diverse backgrounds, they're going to approach the problem from different perspectives. And when you get different perspectives on a problem, the options that you have in terms of going forwards just multiply. And that diversity precipitates debate. It precipitates some conflict, and conflict's actually a good thing in teams, to a certain extent, because through conflict and through debate, we actually resolve issues and we learn new things. So diversity is absolutely essential for a team. I think the second ingredient is purpose, and the team needs to have a very clear direction of which way they're going. And purpose shouldn't be confused with a goal. A goal can sometimes be counterintuitive for a team, because when you set a very targeted goal, you limit creative thinking, because people are just thinking about how to reach the goal. They're not thinking about different ways or better ways of actually moving forwards. So purpose is really important to kind of align a team in a direction, but not too pointedly in that direction. You want to take people forwards, but not really say this is exactly where we need to go. So, good leaders and good teams are able to articulate that purpose in some pretty simple language. We're the team that improves customer service, or we're the team that is fixing this quality problem, and that defines what they're doing. It defines their reason for being, and it gives them a guideline for the way forwards. And I think the third ingredient is learning, and it's absolutely essential that teams learn. Without learning, we don't progress. We don't find out new things. We don't do things differently. And if we don't do things differently, we don't get ahead of our competition, right? So, and how you structure teams, and it's kind of linked with the purpose one, can have a huge effect on whether people in those teams learn or not. And it comes down to, Carol Dweck's work on the fixed and growth mindsets. When you structure teams towards specific goals, you actually promote a fixed mindset. And fixed mindsets are associated with lower degrees of collaboration, less learning, more single-mindedness. Whereas when you set a purpose and set a learning goal, and say, look, we're here to learn how to deliver better customer service, you create a growth mindset. And that mindset is allied with behaviors of openness, collaboration, feedback giving, what you mentioned earlier, and coaching others towards achieving that goal. So in sum, these three things, I think, diversity, purpose, and creating a learning environment are absolutely essential to creating effective teams. And if you do that bit, the communication will follow. If you set the team up like that, they will communicate, even if sometimes that communication isn't perfect, because you've got the right environment. It might take someone a few minutes to explain what they mean, but they will get there, because they'll be listened to, and people will be wanting to learn that person's opinion, because it's essential to moving the team forwards.
Yep. And I think diversity is so important for you, as you just pointed out, that if you have diverse teams, you will have different kinds of mindsets working on the same problem, bringing in different solutions. And that's where you start thinking beyond your own mindset and what you are thinking at the current time. One of the key elements that it was based upon is conflicts. And I wanted to go in detail on this one, because I hear this a lot happening within the student community. When you start working in teams, there are team conflicts arising from little things. They can be related to scheduling meetings, or setting up the right communication channel, being on the same page, delegating the tasks amongst the team members. And I'm sure this kind of a thing also happens in organizations at larger levels, which really impacts the business growth of those companies. So any advice on the basis of your experience on what are the tactics, or what are some of the strategies which teams can use to resolve team conflicts?
Look, you're absolutely right. And I think, looking back on my own career, I can categorically say that some of the best teams I've ever worked in, and the most high performing teams that I've worked in, have actually had also a huge degree of conflict. And this conflict plays out on a number of levels. And I can probably call many stories of some meetings where there was a lot of swearing flying across the table as because people had different views. But I think to embrace conflict, one of the things that always sort of underpinned those discussions is that people had respect of other people's opinions. And even though they didn't agree with what was being said, they had respect for that person. And I think that's really important to take the situation away from the underlying respect levels. And so, so much conflict is often because people just talk about things in different ways. People use different words to describe things. And so, when someone has said one thing, it's just been interpreted in a different way. And you can do two things. You can either keep arguing, or you can try and dig a bit deeper and find out what that person really means. And so, you've got to keep that underlying respect. And, the second really important thing is don't take it personally. Yeah. If someone's got a different opinion to you, then, come back to that growth mindset ideal. A different opinion is an opportunity to learn. It's not a confrontation. It's not something, it doesn't mean that your opinion is no longer valid. It just means it's an opportunity to learn something new. And by approaching it in that way, not taking it personally, listening to the other people's opinion, trying to understand why they're saying that opinion, getting to the bottom of it, what usually happens is that you've got a better solution. I remember loads of examples. I used to work in a sales environment, and I sometimes have a sales brain where I think of opportunities and I go, wow, we can do this, and wow, we can do that. And then there'd be people who are saying, well, how are we going to do that, Brad? And I'm like, well, it's simple. And they're like, well, no, it's not. So, that tension that you have in a team between, new ideas and how we're going to implement those ideas can create some conflict at times. But what happens as a result of that is, the new ideas are not just ideas. They become things that can actually be implemented because we've had that discussion and we've fleshed them out. We've maybe toned down some of the ideas, but we've made them more believable. We've made them more achievable. And that increases trust in the solution that we're presenting to clients. So I think if you can sort of park the confrontation, go with respect, and not take it personally, then you'll be open to really making your solution and your ideas better. And that's what happens when conflict plays out.
Yeah, that's true. How easy it can be just to be a good listener and a patient listener in a meeting rather than always talking. And a lot of people keep on saying that a lot of people in this market are good in speaking, but they don't know how to listen patiently. And if you can understand the art of listening, then probably a lot of conflicts can be resolved, isn't it?
Fundamentally agree. I just couldn't agree more with that. I'd actually advocate listening as a more important skill than speaking sometimes. But yes, absolutely agree. And I think that's something that we don't focus on. We talk about effective teamwork being about communication, and we forget that part of communication is actually listening. And it's not about getting your ideas out there. It's about getting your ideas out there in a way that connects with the existing ideas. And so by listening to how people present their ideas and by incorporating those ideas into your ideas, you can get a much greater cohesiveness. You can get agreement, and with agreement you can move forward. So yeah, absolutely, listening, very underrated, listening. Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the other things that I really wanted to ask you was I've been working for a startup now for more than 2.5 years in Sydney as a marketing and sales specialist. So one of the things that you really realize working in a startup, that resources are quite limited. So you will find more people who are not specialists but are generalists.
Mm-hmm.
They know a lot of things in their role. So if there is a guy who is doing sales, he might be doing multiple things at one time. He might be doing customer support, sales, marketing at one time. Then if you are in the engineering team, there might be guys who might be doing several things at one time. There is always a good scope for you to learn from each other when you are working in that sort of a team, in a small team. But when you go to the large corporate teams, I'm sure that within those teams only, within the marketing team or sales team only, there is a lot of things to learn because of those experienced and multicultural teams coming forward. So my question here is how well you can utilize the strengths of each other while working in a team. Every team member has got a different strength. And I think a team-based working model really gives you that idea or that opportunity to learn from each other, because everybody is not good in everything. Some
Yep.
people are good in painting, some people are good in in terms of organization, some people are good in engineering, some people are good in marketing, some people can speak well, and so they can sell your product in a better way. So there is always something to learn from each other. How would you rate it in that sense?
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, there is always something to learn. From my own example, I do a lot of sailing, and when you're sailing overnight, the most valuable team member isn't the person at the helm driving the boat. It's actually the person making the cups of tea or hot chocolate. Yeah, and so in that environment, and I think and whether it's a startup environment or in your large corporate environment that might have some more established processes, it's really important to focus on strengths and to focus on what people are good at and finding a place for those people. Like the person making the tea on the boat, right? You wouldn't have thought when you're going to race across an ocean that you need someone to make tea overnight, but actually that is a really important thing. And having I would sail, quite frankly, I'd sail with that person over a better sailor, in that particular situation. And these are the types of decisions that leaders have to make. They need to understand some of the requirements, and they need to find people who have some strengths which are complementary. And I think that plays back to to the themes of diversity. And even in those entrepreneurial organizations where there's 1,000 ideas a minute, and there's everyone, the chief engineers sometimes opening the front door for visitors. There is a place for finding for people who are more process driven, people who can help convert some of those great ideas into action. So I think in these contexts, it's about identifying people's strengths, communicating those strengths. And so when you're sitting around those tables, saying, look, this is what I'm good at, this is what I can bring to the team, this is what other people can bring to the team, having those discussions openly and honestly, so that when it comes to it, the tasks or whatever it is that we're doing can fall on those strengths. And the people who aren't strong in those areas aren't having to crazily try and work out how to do things. It just moves to the person who's more natural in that particular capability.
Absolutely. And I think that's why we also talk about the SWOT analysis before you start working in your team. You can always go for that and understand the strengths, weaknesses of your own team members, so that it's not only about organizations. You can also do that for the team members to understand what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are.
And the only difference is we call them strengths and development areas, not weaknesses. That's the only small difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And my next question was related to this only. We also talk about SMART goals for organizations. And I think team based working models are definitely a good foundation to achieve those SMART goals, in a timely manner, in a specific manner, the goals which are measurable. And I think when you're working in a team, you have somebody to delegate the task, you have somebody to perform those tasks, you have somebody to monitor those tasks. So that's where you can also define SMART goals. How do you think SMART goals is directly linked to a team-based working model?
Well, that's a great question, because there's a lot of emerging research, including my own, which looks at how goal setting influences mindsets. And so the short answer is that when you're setting SMART goals, you need to be really, really careful, because anything to do with setting a goal, as I mentioned earlier, activates a fixed mindset. And fixed mindsets are not all bad. There are certainly contexts where goal seeking and relentless focus on achieving a goal, it is an important aspect of any teamwork, but it's not always the case. And there are, equally important, and perhaps even more important, contexts where you need to learn, and you need to learn new things. And in those contexts where we don't really know exactly how to do something, or we don't exactly know the way forwards, having a growth mindset is absolutely essential. And the thing is that, what we're learning is that setting smart goals activates a fixed mindset. So teams who go into those situations where they need to learn, but then set a smart goal about it, are inadvertently activating a fixed mindset. And that's actually detrimental to their success. So I'm not knocking smart goals. I think they have a great part to play in teamwork. But what we need to help leaders understand is the impact of setting goals on people's mindsets, not just their own, but the teams that they're working with. And leaders need to get better at identifying the situations where they need to implement, in which case goals are great because that activates a fixed mindset and a results focus, and situations where they need to learn. And the situations where they need to learn, they need to activate a growth mindset, and they need to do that by setting learning targets. Our target here is to learn how to be better at customer service. A target here is to learn how to improve our quality. By setting learning goals, we actually activate a growth mindset. We get a raft of team enabling, problem-solving behaviors, which is the type of behaviors we want in those situations.
Yeah, wonderful points, Professor. One of the last questions before we end today's podcast would be related to the examples in the real life that we can see from those 2 points that you raised before. That is purpose, which is coming from strong leadership, and also diversity, which is coming by building diverse teams, multicultural teams, coming from different backgrounds, having different skill sets. Now, we know a lot of top companies such as Facebook, Google, Amazon, Alibaba in China. Their leaders have strongly focused on having a very dedicated vision. Sorry to forget about Elon Musk recently, Tesla. So these are the leaders which everyone looks at, that we want to become leaders like them in the near future if we are running our organization, or even if we are running our teams in an organization. Do you have any such examples, or maybe you can elaborate on these examples that I just shared with you, and link it to the 2 points that you raised before of purpose and diversity?
Sure. I'll start with diversity. I had a client once who had absolutely convinced themselves that they had outstanding customer service, absolutely outstanding customer service. And, they built their whole business plan going forwards for the next 3 years based on this perception of outstanding customer service. And anyway, so we came in and we provided a different perspective on that paradigm. And actually, what they believed to be outstanding customer service was actually very bad. It was very poor customer service, and it was because the way they measured their customer service had some flaws in it, which they didn't fix because they thought they had great customer service. And so, if you think you're doing great, you wouldn't really look for a problem, right? So I think that's a great example of diversity, and having, being open to different people coming in and having a look at your core processes. And what that meant was that we were able to focus on the poor customer service and make it a lot better. And so, and that actually radically transformed their business for the better. So yeah, I think that's an example of where being open to having different people come into your organization is really important, and being open to the new ideas that they bring. What was the other example you wanted to ask? Was that smart goals? Was it?
So diversity and purpose.
Purpose, yeah. Purpose. Yeah, I think I've seen lots of examples of companies that forget what it is they're really here to do. And one example was this company, and they were making paint. It sounds pretty boring, but making paint's actually quite complicated. And they had this big production hall where they mixed up the paint from all the chemicals, and then they had another hall where they put the paint into the cans. And these are big cans because the paint goes to the Navy. They're making paint for aircraft carriers essentially. Yeah. And anyway, so we're out there in the factory and we're watching all this and listening to all this, and there's all this whirring going on and lots of activity, and all of a sudden everything stops. And I sort of said, well, why are we stopped? And they said, oh, well, we stop every day around this time. We're waiting for quality. And so we're like looking at, what's going on. Literally hundreds of people are just sat there doing nothing. So we walk over to the quality department and say, what are you doing? They said, oh, we're doing a quality test, and we can't put the paint in the cans until we pass the quality test. And this test was an hour long. So hundreds of people are standing around like with their hands in their pockets, waiting for an hour while we're waiting for this test. And, there are a couple of things going on, but I can tell you one of them is one of us asked the question, how often do we fail this test? And the answer was, we've never failed the test. So, with that, why aren't we just putting the paint in the cans right now? We can still do the test, right? We're not going to send it to the customers, but we're going to at least have 100 people not standing around for an hour. And I think that's the difference between, a process and a purpose. And too often organizations get stuck in the process. We must wait for quality, because that makes sense, right? We have to put quality paint into the cans. But the overall purpose is to run an efficient business, and having 100 people stand around doing nothing for an hour is not an efficient business. Now, even if we failed that quality test 1 in 100 times, which we don't, the worst thing that can happen is we have to put the paint from the cans back into the vats and fix it, right? But the benefit is that 99 times out of 100, we've saved thousands and thousands of hours of labor. So keeping that view on what is our purpose here can help organizations break through some of these paradigms, break through some of the processes which are limiting their potential.
Absolutely. And that's really important to define the values that you have in your organization, and also build those strong teams. That's what we have been talking about, and also retain those teams. What's happened with Better Life recently, the person just removed all the employees on a Zoom call. He called people on a Zoom call and then said that you are not here, you will not be working anymore. So I think retention is very important. And before we end this podcast, I would definitely want to hear from you on that example as well, that when you are building those strong teams, it's also important for you to retain those members in difficult times, so that those team members can actually value you as a leader when you need it the most.
Yeah. Look, I talked about the ingredients for team success, and there's probably 2 other things actually. I didn't talk about the expectations for the people within the teams, and there's a couple of expectations there. And the first one is really simple. For people in a team, you really should put the team first. So what's important for the team is more important than what's important for me. So that sometimes means that I have to compromise what I want to do because I need to do what's best for the team, and the team needs me to think like that. And that's an important sort of switch for people in a team. But for leaders, such as your example, there's another concept which is, again, well researched and well established, and it's a concept of psychological safety. And that is how leaders react to information that comes from the people in their organization. And the critical example is, if someone says, hey, I've got a problem, are they listened to? Are they respected? Or are they kind of talked over and ignored? And so now, even if that person putting their hand up with a problem is saying something stupid, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. How leaders respond to that is really important to create psychological safety. Because if they respond in a way where they listen to their employees and they're appreciative of employees bringing up those issues, they create psychological safety. And that means that future employees are so much more likely to actually bring forward ideas, bring forward problems that need to be addressed, and help the organization on its journey. In contrast, if that person brings up an idea and they're talked over or not listened to, then that doesn't create psychological safety. And that means that the likelihood that that person and their colleagues of bringing up new ideas actually drops off a cliff. And so the very thing that you want as a leader is ideas coming from your team on ways to do things differently doesn't happen anymore because of the way that you've reacted. So I would say that your example, was a well documented example of firing everyone on a Zoom call. I would say that that's not a great way to create psychological safety. And while it might have been the best thing for that business at a time, but everyone knows that example now. So everyone working with that leader in the future, let's say that leader goes and starts up a new enterprise, everyone's going to have in the back of their head, oh, hang on, this person sacked everyone on a Zoom call. That's not going to create psychological safety. That's going to create distrust. It's not going to get, the people within those future organizations are not going to bring up ideas. They're not going to bring up problems. They're not going to help. They're just going to sit there and they're going to wait for the boss. And that's never a good situation to be in.
Well, these are the examples that people can obviously listen to, and it can act as a case study as well for university students and also for organizations to just take that as a lesson that you should obviously respect your employees and all the important points that we have discussed in this session. So thank you so much, Professor Bradley, for joining us. I really appreciate your time to join us today. And
thanks, Rob. It's been a pleasure. It's been a delight. Good to see you again.
Another episode.
Yes. Oh, of course. Yes.
Thank you, and have a great day ahead.
You too. You too.
This is an Ultimate Global podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.